Hi, I'm Ezra Radoff, and I'm doing part 2 of the Rambam's Moreh Nevukim guide for the Perplexed. To go a little bit more in depth as to how the Rambam explains his approach and his first initial argument with the other, mostly Aristotle, I'm going to divide it into 3 different arguments that he makes and talk about general approach. Aristotle, along with traditional philosophical thought, had always divided up the different areas, disciplines of study, into the same few categories. This was back when that was possible. We'd have math and physics and astronomy and metaphysics, ethics, things like that. Sometimes they would overlap, to be fair, but they would pretty much keep the disciplines separated. So when they come to a book like the Torah, which starts off talking about creation as sort of a matter of fact, sounds like a history lesson or a geography or astronomy lesson, and then it comes to the part where it says, "Let us make man in our image." It sounds very much like it could be referring to a physical image, a physical manifestation, especially against the backdrop of how the Greeks and other civilizations saw the human body as some sort of embodiment of perfection and something to be deified. So it takes a big effort, a Herculean effort, to go against that, and so Rambam does it in 3 different ways, and I'm loosely using these terms, but 3 different types are a logical argument, a deconstructionist argument, and a constructivist argument. So when the Aristotle and those people would talk about physics, they concentrated a lot on the ideas of form and shape, matter and essence, 2 ways to look at things. What makes a cat makes a thing, and then what it's actually made out of: fur and toenails, a tail, and a brain and a nervous system, as opposed to a cat, which is a complete being, a complete idea with variations to it. So when the Torah discusses things like shape and form or image, it's not necessarily talking about those kinds of ideas. The Torah is foremost a morality, a lesson in morality. So the strength of Aristotle's argument in the creation story is that it appears to be about physical science, and it is not. It is a mix of the physical, metaphysical, and ethical. Form and substance as topics aren't that interesting in metaphysics. It is thought of in halacha, but it doesn't have the same kind of physical reality that the Aristotelians talk about. So when we come to a word like tzelem isn't really form, it's really not shape. It's more of an idea or a concept. Tzelem, the Rambam will say, the actual meaning of the answer, what is tzelem Elokim, what is the image of, what does it mean when man is made in the image of God, is it has to follow a certain amount of rules. The Rambam's rules is that God is not corporeal, God is timeless, God is shapeless, without form, so therefore it must be referring to something very, very different. And he says that what it means is, tzelem means is the intellect, which is formless, shapeless, but it permeates everything. Design, the idea of design, the concept of design and laws of nature permeates everything, but it can't be grasped or felt or really described in any other way except as how it manifests itself. So there's a very, very close description of what God is. God is a emanation of all of these rules of nature and laws and the reality of how things work. the intelligence behind it. The intelligence which allows the creation of extremely complicated systems, like life, of course. Something very interesting here, the Rambam is making a chiddush, which is that tselem must mean a representation of something else, not necessarily physical, but something that is very core to their essence, and the definition of what they are. That means that if man is made in tselem Elohim, that is man's primary identity, that man has intelligence. And it also means that that's Hashem's primary identity, is that Hashem is wisdom. So that's a big deal. Even a single-celled organism or a plant has an extremely huge structure and many, many, many layers, going down to the subatomic. So it's very well and good for the Rambam to say that, and this is a constructivist argument. He's saying the Torah is about ethics. It's not about the construction of the universe and how it works physically. The reason that any of this stuff is described at all, the creation of the universe and the plants and the animals, is because all of these things were, by some civilization, worshipped as deities, and they're in this story to show that if you're worshiping any of these things, then you got it wrong, because Hashem made all of these things. And that's the only reason it's in there. This is a constructivist argument because it's based on this grounded idea built up by all the commentaries of why the Torah is the way it is. And if there is a divine God who's all-powerful, what would he say and why would he say it? So it is a complete view, and that is why it starts at the beginning, the way it starts at the beginning. The first comment on why doesn't God start the Torah with the first relevant act that involves humans is this very reason, because we have to show that God created all these things that we ascribe to other powers or ascribe ownership to people, like land. So that's the constructivist argument. This is why tselem is confusing. And he goes on to quote other parts of the Torah where the words for form and substance, as Aristotle would say, are used, and they are different words. And each word must be unique, have a unique purpose. If it's a divine document, there's not going to be sloppy definitions here. So he talks about the words for the form of an idol, for example, that the police team brought when they sent back the Mishkan. They made an idol, and the idol is a representation of a deity. So in that sense, it is a image, but it's not that kind of an image. So this is a little bit tricky because it's a word that's basically tselem, related to tselem, to define the idol, and the idol is a physical thing. But the point here is that what an idol is really is not about the stone that it's made out of and the form that it takes. If it looks like a cat, or it looks like a mouse in this case, or a hemorrhoid idol, is that it's the idea behind it, that there's some deity that is influenced and animates something in reality based on this idol, works through the idol. That makes the idol an image of the identity of what the deity is. So in that way, tselem is appropriate because it's capturing, in a way, a representation of the essence of the deity. So therefore, even though an idol is really not the same thing as what we're talking about with the intellect, it is still a detached image of the identity of something else. So then the word is still appropriate to use there. When we get into other words like domei, something is like something else, or tzura, which is a form which really has nothing, which is more of an Aristotelian definition, then the words have to be different because we're talking more concretely, or we're talking poetically. To sum up, there's tselem, which means the essence or the image of something in a moral or a identity kind of a way of denoting identity. There's domē, which means something is like something else in another aspect, and then there's tsura, which is physical form along the lines of an Aristotelian idea of form, but a definition for a term for something. And he talks about how Yosef was a very handsome person. Potiphar saw Yosef and saw how handsome he was, and those words for how he was handsome in form, that's a different word also. That's an actual physical, just a physical description. So there's a whole constructed universe of the Torah that the Rambam makes here, where you can have something compared to something else as an idea, tselem, and you can have another way to compare something as a form or an image of something else, as an idol that has an idea behind it, or you can do something completely concretely as to the way somebody appeared. So that's constructivist argument. The deconstructionist argument is why, Aristotle, do we have to talk about form and shape the way you do? Just because all of these treatises on philosophy are laid out to be physics and metaphysics and ethics, and talk about form and substance. Why does the Torah have to conform to that model at all? So this is a tough argument to make, because from Aristotle on through Rambam's time, even those philosophers used this same model of how to study things, and it became so such a standard that these kinds of definitions and terms and categories just are assumed to be how everything is, in very natural categories. But who said that should be the case? So when the Rambam is saying there's no reason that the Reshit story has to be about one category or another category, or can be mixed together, he's deconstructing Aristotle's whole model. Now, as philosophy and science progressed, of course, that model fell completely apart. Well, not completely apart, but it became much more complicated, and it was very easy to question, but in Rambam's time it was not. Now, of course, you can't separate all of knowledge into these 7 or 8 different categories, and there's no way anyone can even approach the idea of learning all of these different sciences. Back then, you could know everything we thought there was to know, because all of these studies were very, very small. But now, there are different challenges presented. So that was the classical model. But, it stems from a good question, an honest question, which is what his student was asking. It's like, boy, this sure sounds like what that God is a man. And we know that from our teaching is that God can't be corporeal. So when Rambam says, well, we know can't be true because we go against our constructivist model of what we think God is, that he can't have arms and legs, and that the Torah is very logical, and it's implying in the Torah that this is a unique feature of man, that he hasn't made an image of God, and arms and legs aren't that unique. It's not going to be a very impactful argument on the Aristotelian thinkers or the people that will look at it this way. So you need the constructivist and then deconstruction argument. The constructivist argument would say, since we know that it's a divine document, and that we need different words for things, when we prove that form, meaning a physical form, is a different word than tselem, we know that tselem must mean something else. But they would just turn right around and say, well, who said that it was a divine document anyway? So you need constructivist, and you need logical, and you need the deconstruction. The logical argument is the weakest one, which is the one saying a physical form. Tselem can't mean physical form because something else means physical form, and we know that the Torah doesn't use synonyms that way because it's a perfect document, because it's created by God. That logical argument only works in a constructed universe where you're believing that it was a divine document. So we have to sum up. We have the constructivist argument, which gives a whole universe to all different topics and different words and ways to describe form and shape, and the ideas behind why the Torah was created in the way it was, and why it's not necessarily a history of physical reality in the beginning. We have a deconstruction argument, which is saying to Aristotle, who cares what your definitions of form and substance are? And we have the logical argument, which is, we would say, it's sort of related to the constructivist argument, which we would say that if this is a unique feature that people resemble God, we have to find a feature of God that nobody else has but humans. Therefore, it has to bound by all the definitions of what God can't be, and it has to be unique to humans. So those are the three basic ways that he's going to attack. We'll go into each of the three in depth in a minute. So on the one hand, he's able to refute that Tselem means form by going, no, it couldn't mean form, because there's a unique role of humans in the world which is not anything corporeal. It has to do with their intellect, which is like God, and that's what Tselem means. And at the same time, he has knowledge of the Potiphar story, which shows how you would say if something is a beautiful in form, or how you would describe form. So he proves it by refutation, and he proves it by using his positive constructivist model of the way things work in the Torah. You need both, because if you just have deconstruction as an argument, at the end, once you deconstructed everything, you don't have anything left. And to be a theologian, you need to have a constructed view of the world, because it was made by a designer, and it has a purpose, and it has a completeness to it. So you have to, this is what the Rambam is saying, you have to round out and complete your education and approach things methodically, because then you'll have a whole sphere, let me use the metaphor, of a solid construction, and that somehow enables you to fight off things from other people's spheres that are going to bump into yours. Construction. So if you're using this construction as type of proof here, which the Rambam is saying in the introduction that we need to have, he's got a whole way to look at things. He's got a word for form, he's got a word for essence or symbolic meaning, or some sort of quality like intelligence, which is what we're going to find out Tselem really means. It means intelligence. That's the unique thing about humans that they share with God, and none of the other creatures have. These are non-graspable things, but because he has this whole world constructed, he doesn't really need to deal with Aristotle on his own terms. So terms like form and substance and how things are constructed physically aren't really things you have to grapple with. So now, once you presented things like morality and tselem and representation and images and all kinds of other ideas that don't exist in any kind of physical way that we know, the question is, are these constructs for people? Are they our imagination, or are they actual physical reality in the universe? And the Jewish answer is yes, they are. There is a thing such as good and evil, and it exists outside of your imagination, and it permeates the universe like a field. And this is a very interesting idea. That's why you can have a tselem of Hashem, and it can emanate from God's intelligence into your intelligence. So this opens up a lot of possibilities and ideas. That's the realm of metaphysics. These things exist and that they are true, and they're true everywhere. Another thing I want to deal with is we're going to see eventually the Rambam make a mistake. And how we deal with his mistakes, especially in the case, one of the most obvious ones is the idea of celestial spheres, which isn't exactly physics, and it's not exactly metaphysics either. What do you in the case when Aristotle and the Rambam are both wrong? But I think we can find a comfort in this. The first thing it means is that, yeah, you can go fight all the scientists and win all the battles, but that's not going to lead you to the ultimate truth anyway. That'll just get you as far as you can get scientifically at that moment. And in Rambam's time, that was way behind where we are now. But it also shows that science can be wrong, and that you can lose to science or win to science and still be right. That just because an idea can't be refuted doesn't mean it's correct. And that's just because you haven't come up with the rebuttal for it, refutation doesn't mean that what you're saying isn't true. We can see that some of the things are going to fall off from the Guide for the Perplexed, so they're just not relevant anymore, but other things are going to stick. And the core values of Judaism and what we believe do stick. Because you look at the example of the spheres, celestial spheres, once they fall off, then you know what, in the end, it doesn't really influence Jewish thought at all, because there's nothing in Jewish thought that directly deals with that kind of reality. You can still read any kind of physics or metaphysics or philosophy of Judaism or the Torah and not believe in the spheres. So this is sort of a way of burning off the excess too. And I find this in a way very comforting. I also find it comforting to know that there aren't too many examples of this, even after 900 years. So here the Rambam talks about, I'll go inside the text here. I hold that the Hebrew equivalent of form, to'ar, is the figure and shape of a thing. Thus we find Yosef was beautiful in to'ar and beautiful in appearance. The term is not at all applicable to God. The term tselem, on the other hand, signifies the specific form, vis-a-vis that which constitutes the essence of a thing. Because you can add things to something and take away things, and things can change. But at some point, a change enough will make something change its identity. So what is the identity? So what is the core part of that? So tselem is really a question of identity. You can have a book and you can put a brick on top of it, and it's not a brick book now, it's still just a book with a brick on top of it. You can take out pages of the book and it's still a book. At some point you do something to it in the extreme and it ceases to become a book. That definition is tselem. The boundary of what I just described is the tselem. Maybe if you erased all the words, then it wouldn't be a book anymore because there's nothing written in it, and it would be just a bunch of pages. Maybe then it wouldn't be a book anymore. But that definition, which is very hard or impossible to make concrete, is what tselem is. It's a representation. It's something having to do with identity. So, in man, the form that is consistent, which gives him human perception, is that constituent which gives him human perception, and on account of his intellectual perception, the term tselem is employed in the sentences, in the tselem of God he created them. It is therefore rightly said in another pasuk that they despise their tselem. Someone doesn't hate someone else's appearance so much, really, they hate the person. So that kind of contempt can only be about directed toward what somebody represents or their identity or their personality. I am also of the opinion that the reason why this term is used for idols may be found in the circumstance that they are worshipped on account of some idea represented by them, not because of their shape. So when we call an idol a tselem, it's because
it's representative of something else, which is an egregious idea. I mean, a little statue is just a little statue. It's a piece of stone. Who cares? But the idea is that there is a alternate power here besides God, which is a completely different and other idea. There's another example he brings with where the police team were cursed by having hemorrhoids and by having mice infest their country, and they decided, okay, we give up. We're going to send the Aron Kodesh, the Ark of the Covenant, back to the Jews. And they say, well, that's not enough. We have to send like a sacrifice of our own back to God, as it were, back to the Jewish people. And they added little gold idols in the shape of the mice and the hemorrhoids, and to rid themselves of this curse that they had gotten from stealing the Ark. So there, the word Tselem is used also, and the Rambam says that what they're trying to say here is that the representation they have of these curses should be exercised from them with this kapara, this atonement offering to God, that he will not extract, that he will extract the idea of mice and hemorrhoids out from their lot from this image they created of them. Next we go into a word which is dameh, demut, he is like, which is another word that refers to appearance, form, how things are imagined, how we relate to another thing. This term likewise denotes agreement with regard to some abstract relation. I am like a pelican in the wilderness. It's good for similes. The author does not compare himself to the pelican in point of wings and feathers, but in point of sadness. So dameh is abstract also, like Tselem, and the Rambam's building on the point that we're not talking about purely physical ideas here. We have a lot of different places where we do more than that. He is like unto a lion. It's not a guy with a mane and claws and everything. It's about some abstract idea. So in this first chapter, to sum up, we are talking about what Tselem means, that Tselem is an idea, that dameh is an idea, that the concrete version of form, which we talk about in the philosophers, would be toar, and it's used in different places, and shows that there are two different words. To summarize, he says, as man's distinction consists in a property which no other creature on earth possesses, intellectual perception, in the exercise of which he does not employ his senses, nor move his hand or foot. This perception has been compared, though only apparently not in truth, to the divine perception, which requires no corporeal organ. On this account of the divine intellect with which man has been endowed, he is said to have been made in the form and likeness of the Almighty, but far from it to be the notion that the Supreme Being is corporeal, having a material form. Micro-topics concerning the Guide to the Perplexed. Aristotle was basically the person who defined all of philosophical terms, and it's the foundation where everybody draws comparisons from and to. When you start off with a treatise, you have to start with a basic definition of terms and a basic idea, and any growth out of that was a comparison basically to Aristotle. So it's really hard to move without Aristotle being a subject, which is why he comes up so much. That ain't true anymore. This was 900 years ago. So the introduction, I think, like a lot of Sfarim by the greats, what strikes me is the care that they had for their students, even one student, to go to a great length and spend an inordinate amount of time to show their caring for the other person, to write this explicitly, and to write entire manuals perhaps and great responsa just to help them with a question. And it also amazes me how much he goes to great lengths to care about the future of the book and who's going to read it, and seems to have a very, very long vision of who might get a hold of it and what they might do with it, and how it should be, how his words should be accepted. A very cautionary and very responsible role. Eventually, what happened in history is we came up to the limits of Aristotle, and even after Aristotle, when we had some of the other philosophers, which we'll see after the Middle Ages, they're using a lot of the same terminology he used, so that still stays relevant in modern philosophy. Talking about Schopenhauer, Kant, and Spinoza, any of these people. The other thing is that in the old days, a philosopher really there was no term philosopher or scientist or maybe physician. There was, but a man of science, was a man of science, because there wasn't that much to know. You could theoretically go and study everything there was to know in the sciences. You could learn all the prerequisite math. It only went up to maybe trigonometry in those days. I'm not sure when calculus came around, but you didn't have advanced math back then. Astronomy was it was advanced but graspable by a couple semesters of study. There wasn't a lot with the physical sciences known, medicine and biology, so you could actually go and know everything and have a complete view of the world, which was something Aristotle tried to do, and do what the Rambam did, which is also have a very well-rounded knowledge of the Torah, and then you could kind of know and conquer it all. This is not possible today. This isn't even close to possible today. So the idea of taking all the secular knowledge and these structures and everything and comparing them and using your mind to sort them out with Torah is really an absurd idea, and only the very deluded and arrogant would think to do this today. You'll see people that are cavalier about this today and will go, I have a great mind and I'm going to go learn the secular sciences because it will really reinforce and strengthen my knowledge of Torah and knowledge of God, and I will become just sort of this superhuman conqueror of all knowledge. And you can't do that today. It's not possible. And these people will truly become perplexed. And it's an arrogant idea, and it's based on not wanting to be the best person you can be, but wanting to conquer. And it's not healthy, and it's an arrogant idea. It has to be, because it's impossible. On the other hand, the knowledge of certain complicated, complex achievements in science is fairly common to most of modern society. People know a little bit about atomic theory, they know a little bit about astronomy, the theory of evolution, and these other very difficult topics to deal with. So on the one hand, you can't really go up against Aristotle today, or what he represented. On the other hand, you kind of have to. So that puts the book in a different context. It sort of outdates the purpose of the book in one way. I'm going to try and examine how we can keep some of those lessons intact. So what Aristotle does, what Rambam does here is, when he talks in the introduction to the student he's writing this to, is he's saying, you're not going to solve this problem by picking apart little ideas here and there. Someone comes out with an idea in quantum mechanics and you say, aha, but then they discover a new skull of a prehistoric man in South America, and then you're like, now I have to deal with this. That's not going to work, fighting all these little battles. He says you need a structure that's complete and intact in itself, a view that is built up in a organized way, and a complete view of Torah, and compare it to these complete views of the world, and that will give you an idea. And when in the first chapter, he talks about this question of if God is corporeal or not, he does it in a complete way. He takes all the terms for form and shape and image and construction, and shows how all these different things contrast and build a vocabulary, complete vocabulary, for how we compare ideas. And for those of you who thought that I wasn't serious when I said that the Rambam, even the Rambam, who people look at as a champion for learning about secular sciences, was not cautionary about learning secular subjects, read the introduction of the Guide for the Perplexed. He says, first, I'm going to summarize some, but directly quote others from this translation. My dear pupil, ever since you resolved to come to me, I thought of your thirst for knowledge and your fondness for speculative pursuits, and how you expression for how you love knowledge in your poems, and I was not yet able to test your powers of apprehension, and I thought your desire might possibly exceed your capacity. When you had gone through a course in astronomy, then I was more convinced. Observing your great fond for mathematics, I let you study them more deeply, for I felt sure of your ultimate success. So he's not giving him carte blanche to study even mathematics. I commenced by way of hints. I noticed that you desired additional explanation, and urging me to expound on some metaphysical problems and to teach you the system of mutakalemim, which is basically the Islamic scientific advanced thought, modern thought for that time. It's like modern orthodoxy and Islamic enlightenment urges at that time, which was a fairly intimidating threat to Judaism in that era, in that area. I urge you to desist from this pursuit and enjoin you to continue your studies systematically. For my object was that the truth should present itself in connected order, and that you should not hit upon it by mere chance. This is the argument I was saying for Rambam, saying that you need a complete world view. I did not presume to think that this treatise settles every doubt in the minds of those who understand it. Listen to this. Know also that in natural science there are topics which are not to be fully explained. Not just in metaphysics, but in the natural science there are places where you don't go. Period. No matter how smart you are, no matter how you do it the right way. This is not exactly a ringing endorsement to study the natural and scientific world to flesh out your understanding of God. He also says, consider the chapters in connected order, which is another description of doing things in a complete way, in a systematic way. And since I said that this book has to be constructed in at least a loose order, I heard a lecture by Rav Aaron Lopiansky on chapter 1, where he described this as not nearly as consistent or not organized like his other books are. And I make it a habit not to argue with Rav Aaron Lopiansky, but I'll just let this statement stand on itself. Consider the chapters in connected order. In studying each chapter, do not content yourself with comprehending its original subject, but attend to every term mentioned therein, although it may seem to have no connection with the principal subject. He says, you must study thoroughly and read continually, for then you will find the solution for those important problems of religion which are the source of anxiety to all intelligent men. And here he goes. I adjure any reader of the book in the name of the Most High not to add any explanation even to a single word, nor to explain to another any portion of it except such passages as have been fully treated of by previous theological authorities. He must not teach others anything that he has learned from my work alone. In other words, what I was saying before about we're going to use this book as just a way to reinforce traditional Jewish thought, he actually says it exactly in here. I didn't know that until I had reread the introduction. Because of the nature of the book, we have to stick to a conservative viewpoint of it and just let it be a tool for reinforcing what we know and not try and pull out any new ideas we think we have seen.